An embargo is an official ban on trade or other commercial activity with a particular country. After the Spanish and American War in 1898, Spanish signed off Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the U.S. Cuba's economy was growing rapidly and the U.S. wanted to invest in the country. They purchased around 87% of Cuba's exports and controlled the sugar industry in Cuba. Fidel Castro led a national movement to overtake Cuba from Fulgencio Batista, who was the former president of Cuba. After the movement, Castro was announced as the Prime Minister of Cuba. Since then, the country has been known as a communist country for over 50 years. In March 17, 1960, President Eisenhower went forward with a plan to overthrow Castro. The idea of the plan was the elimination of sugar purchases, the end of oil deliveries, and the continuation of the embargo. A year later, in 1961, JFK was president. He approved a plan to overthrow Castro by the Bay of Pigs invasion. During the invasion, which was launched in Guatemala and lasted 2 days, the U.S. were defeated by Cuban troops. Soon after, Congress passed the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. This act prohibited any aid to Cuba and allowed the president to impose a complete trade embargo against Cuba. In September 7, 1962, JFK expanded the embargo to include all Cuban trade. A year later, in 1963, the U.S. government forbade Americans to travel to Cuba. On March 12, 1996, the Helms-Burton Act was made. It strengthened and continued the embargo on Cuba, and it imposed penalties to companies that did business in Cuba. The former president, Barack Obama, has lifted various travel and financial restrictions and opened embassies since he announced the thawing of relations with Cuba in December 2014, but Congress has refused his cause to lift the embargo. Right now, Trump has not done anything regarding the embargo with Cuba.